Okay, great.
All right. So again, welcome to the FEMA and flood maps information session brought to you by Val VanGorder at Bailey Place Insurance with some pretty significant history in flood insurance, and she has kindly offered her services to present this at the chamber today and has brought cookies. So make sure you get some of those. And thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for having me. Move forward. Please. Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Nice to be here. Yes, I'm VP at Bailey Place Insurance. I've been there for over 15 years now, and I've been involved with flood insurance for many years. I was actually an alderman in the city of Cortland for a couple of years, a couple terms, and had some experience with flood insurance then. I do have designations. I was actually one of the co-chairs for the City of Cortland Flood Task Force that we had a few years back. I've been a FEMA referral agent, flood insurance agent, and like I said, a former City of Cortland Alderperson. And by the way, my presentations are really informal, so if you have questions as we go, just, stop me, interrupt, ask, please. Just for a little background, Bailey Place Insurance, we're one of the largest independent agencies in Central New York. Chris is one of our agents. We just were awarded a best practices agency, which is a really big deal. There's only 10 in New York State. We do all sorts of insurance, home, landlord, commercial, farms, flood insurance. I also dabble in Medicare. I do a lot of Medicare plans for people. And we work with the National Flood Insurance Program, but we also work with private flood insurance companies. So we have lots of options for people. So a flood, what is a flood? Well, the FEMA defines a flood as a temporary condition of partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres or 2 or more properties. And it's defined as overflow of inland or tidal waters or unusual and rapid accumulation of runoff or mud flow. So floods really are the most common disaster and the most expensive disaster in the United States. If you have a 30-year mortgage, you have a 10% chance of having a flood, but a 26% chance of having, or 10% chance of having a fire, 26% chance of having a flood over the course of your mortgage. And, just turn the news on. I mean, look what happened in New Jersey this past weekend, and there's been flooding, all around this area, those horrible Texas floods that happened. This area, Tompkins County, in May and June, we had several flood warnings. Cortland County did too. And you can see the picture there of buttermilk flood. Yes.
Is that because floods tend to be big events that take out like hundreds of houses at once? And the fire is more isolated?
It could be more than that, but it's very common too. They happen all over the country. And I mean, Alaska is even having huge flooding problems, right?
And they happen, they're big.
Right, and they tend to affect a lot of properties. Yeah, I don't know if you saw, I saw the news this morning with New Jersey, and we go down to the Jersey Shore all the time, and the water was in the streets. It's up past the dunes. Floods are very devastating. And so why do flood maps change? Well, flood risk can change. Water flow, drainage problems. You can have different protections. Levees and dams can change. And so really the flood maps can become no longer accurate. So back in 2003, Congress mandated that every community has to update their flood maps. So they've been going nationwide to different areas, updating flood maps, trying to make them more accurate. Cortland County got theirs updated in 2010, and now they're just coming around to Tompkins County. So now it's you guys' turn over here. And so I think everybody, wrong way here. Let's go back. So everybody's pretty familiar with the new mapping. I think it's been out again since June 18th, when the maps actually went into effect in Tompkins County. And it's been 44 years since the maps were last updated, so I guess it is kind of time. You know, more properties have been added now, just in the city, there's over like 1,200 properties that have been added. There have been some properties that have been removed. If you're newly placed in a property, and by now a lot of people have gotten a letter from their lenders, but the lenders are required that if you're in a special flood hazard area and you have a federally backed mortgage, they have to require that you carry flood insurance. And you have, once you get that letter, you have 45 days to get a policy in place. If you don't, the lenders actually will force place a policy on your property. And the city has been working on a mitigation project, and they've been working with the community rating system through FEMA to try to alleviate some of the flood insurance costs. And I think their ultimate goal is to actually get a lot of properties removed based on, you know, levees and other work that they're trying to do with the creeks and things like that.
Is that likely to be successful?
It might, but I think it might take a few years for them to get there.
Yeah, we've all heard about the dredging of the inlet.
Yeah.
You know, everyone's been trying to do for the last.
Right, right. And there's so many, you know, requirements that they have to meet to do anything like that, so. So some people, you know, they'll call us and say, can you find out if I'm in a flood zone? Well, if you've been mapped by FEMA, you are in a flood zone. It just depends on your level of risk. So, the risk, they have developed this new rating system, which they call risk rating 2.0. And it used to be that like a whole area was rated a certain way. Now they're actually looking at individual properties. They're supposed to be using LIDAR and base flood elevations, proximity to water. There's a lot of different things that actually go into the determination of what zone a certain property is in. So the B, C, D, and X zones are the lower risk zones, which they call preferred risks. And then the A and V zones are the special flood hazard areas. And V zones are really for the coastal areas, but you'll see like, we'll see AE or A or AO. Any of those with A as the first letter means you're in a special flood hazard area. Which means that you will, if you have a federally backed loan, you'll have to buy flood insurance. But, you know, you can purchase flood insurance in any zone, so.
I have a question, you have more granular looking at individual properties. Personal circumstance with my home, actually, we paid off our mortgage, we're now doing a HELOC. We're required to have flood insurance because an accessory building, a garage, which is on the property, is in the flood zone. There's the backyard in the flood zone, the house itself is not. So when you have accessory buildings, but the residential real estate is not in the flood zone, but land in the property is, what is that?
So if it's just land, then.
Just land, you're fine.
Again, it depends on the banks. Banks
Sure.
can make their own
Make your own,
requirements.
so you can
Yes.
shopping around,
Yes.
like a mortgage,
Yeah.
or HELOC makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay, but what about accessory buildings?
So something like a garage,
Yeah.
again, that depends, if they're determining that any part of the collateral of the loan belongs to the garage,
Yeah.
then it's a FEMA requirement. If it's just the bank, then that's just the bank requiring it.
Okay,
So
so
it's
like I've got to go bank shopping
It's up to the banks. Yeah, you could talk to other banks and see if they would require that. And-
or go. Would Loma help with that at all? I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but like we have 5 inches literally up a back step, which I'm ready to rip off my house
Yeah,
at this point. And a deck which does not exist, but it shows up in the FEMA. FEMA says we have a deck, we don't have a deck.
yeah, so probably getting an elevation study
Yeah.
might be the thing
Would
to
be there.
do.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
but you don't know until you get it done what it shows either.
Right, and that's with
And they
a
can be expensive.
civil engineer or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, a licensed architect or civil
Okay.
engineer. So again, not just high risk zones have floods. Over 20% of all the NFIP claims come from lower outside of the high risk zones. From 2003 to 2023, 99% of counties in the country had some kind of a flooding event. And just 1 inch of water can cause over $25,000 of damage. And, you know, there's just so many incidences like we talked about earlier of, you know, recent tornadoes, microbursts, ice dams, coastal flooding, all that kind of stuff that we've seen. So again, regardless of your zone, it is always a good idea to purchase flood insurance. So flood insurance, so the National Flood Insurance Program is the most common way people purchase flood insurance. It's a single peril policy, and it's designed to pay to cover damages to your structure or your contents, depending on if you purchase contents insurance also from a flooding event. And again, we work with private flood insurance companies too, which gives us more options for people. They're 1-year policies, and you have to pay them in full upfront. And you can transfer the policies on a sale. So again, if your structure, if you're in a special flood hazard area and you have a federally backed loan, you are required, the lending institution actually is required by the government, by the Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1974, to require that the homeowner, the building owner, the property owner purchase flood insurance. And often, if you don't, the bank will force place a policy. Sometimes they're more expensive, but we have actually seen where they're less expensive. So that can be an option for people too. So the minimum requirement is you at least have to have the loan amount that you have outstanding. And if it's a HELOC, you have to cover the full amount, because at any time you could take that, you know, if you only have 20,000 out on a $50,000 loan, the next day you could go take the other 30 out. So they will require you carry the whole amount of the HELOC. And like we talked about, banks do have their own say. So if they want to require that you carry flood insurance, even if you're not in a state, if you're next to a creek, but not in a special flood hazard area, or whatever the circumstances are, they can require it. And you have to maintain the coverage amount the whole time you have the loan. So, but we have decreased it for people. So maybe they started out with $150,000 loan, and after 5 or 8 or 10 years, they're down to 80 or 90. We can lower the amount if they want. I mean, again, you know, a lot of people, they don't want to purchase flood insurance. It's an expense, and we get that, but it is an insurance to help if something does happen. So, you know, it's up to the property owner to decide that. And again, you can purchase it in any zone. Privately financed properties are not necessarily, depends on who's financing it, but you're not necessarily required to carry flood insurance. But, you know, again, if you're in a special flood hazard area, it's probably a really good idea. And again, you know, homeowner policies, landlord policies, business insurance policies generally do not have cover flooding. So they are, you know, a separate private policy that you would need to get. So. One likes to stick. So where can you buy flood insurance? Again, the most common way is through the National Flood Insurance Program. They work with only participating communities, which most communities in the country do participate, but Enfield for a long time did not participate, but I think that they do now. We also work with when Selective and Assurance, we have several write your own companies, but those policies, they're going through the National Flood Insurance Program. The policy should be the same, you know, no matter what company you use. But the private insurance companies, they have their own underwriting guidelines and things, and they can be the policies can vary widely with those different companies. So a standard NFIP policy, what it covers, obviously the building, the foundation, a detached garage, it will cover up to 10% of a detached garage, as long as it's only used as a garage. If it's, you know, has an apartment or anything else, it won't fall under the policy. The electrical and plumbing system. So like, think about your basement, you know, you have maybe your electric panel down there, your furnace, your hot water heater, that's all going to be covered. Heat pumps, light fixtures, built-in appliances like dishwashers. It also will cover debris removal. And you can purchase contents coverage too. But what's not covered, wells, septic systems, sidewalks, decks, patios, vehicles, so vehicles would fall under your car insurance. So basement coverage is very tricky because there's not a lot other than, again, the furnace and the electric panel, but contents coverage in a basement is not covered. So if you have a finished basement and you have furniture down there, you have flood, it's not going to be covered. Walls and ceiling depends on if they're not made of drywall, like if you have paneling in a basement, it's not going to be covered. Yes.
I have a question that's related to basements. I don't know if it's the right time for it, but so I'm an architect, and when we design structures in a flood zone, I assume that we can just sort of set, if it's a slab on grade, we could set the finished floor at an elevation and ramp into it to get the client out of the flood zone, correct?
Right.
Okay, so and then the complicated question is like, how do you set that elevation? Is that an easy answer, or we can talk about?
Well, so you would have an elevation study done,
Yep.
find out the base flood elevation for that property.
Yep.
And where the lowest adjacent grade would be above the base flood elevation. So that's what they look at when you do a
So
letter
find
map
the line, figure that elevation, and then just set the building
above that.
above that elevation.
Yep.
And then
you would apply for a letter of map amendment through FEMA to say that the property was in zone X or not in that
Okay.
A zone.
And then what if it had a basement?
Friends who moved gave us.
What if
What if the client asks for a basement?
okay, so in that case, there is a way to grade around the property.
Yep.
Above the,
Sure.
so that the lowest adjacent grade.
Yep.
Through fill is
Yep.
above the base flood elevation.
And still waterproofing at the foundation.
Right.
Which really was gonna stop the water.
Right, right.
Okay, so as
But
long
as
as,
far as not having the requirement of purchasing flood insurance.
as long as the sort of top of the waterproof foundation and the grade is above the flood zone, it can have a basement and not trigger flood insurance.
Right, but again, you'd have to go through a letter of map amendment through fill, which is a little bit different.
Doesn't
And
make a
you'd have to
sense.
apply for that and make sure that FEMA approved it.
And basically applying for an exception from the flood map.
Right.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, well, they strike.
I had heard, I don't know if this is true, but maybe you can tell us.
Containers.
Water in the basement from ground source water is not considered a flooding event and is not covered by flood insurance.
Generally, yes.
So it's how water gets in a basement
Right.
is important when we're talking about
Right.
this.
Right, and you saw when the first definition, it was overland flooding,
Land, yeah.
so.
You know, if we pull the trigger 5, 4, 5.
So with the again, the private flood insurance and non-NFIP policies, we work with several A-rated, financially stable, private flood insurance companies. They are accepted by lenders, for both conventional and FHA. For a long time, FHA loans would not accept private flood insurance, and now they do. Again, they're 1-year policies too. They are pay in full. Every company has their own underlying underwriting guidelines, and some only do single or 2-family properties. Some will do residential and commercial. We always try to get pre-approval when we do private flood policies. The premiums can be from 10 to 50% less in some cases. So it really is nice that we have that option. Sometimes they're more than the FEMA policies. We just really never know until we actually do the quoting. They do have some that offer loss of rents, for business owners or loss of use. They all have different deductible actions, just like the FEMA policies do. And they do have to be comparable to or better than the FEMA policies. That's why banks will accept them. Yes.
I had a question online. If you get contents coverage, does it cover your items in your basement?
No.
Tops on the lake.
It was a simple one.
So really, since.
So if you want to find out, what zone your property is in, if you've been newly mapped, it's like I said, you probably have already gotten a letter from your bank. But if you just want to know, we can run a flood zone determination for you. We're happy to do that.
Crazy.
Again, a few times over the years, I've seen where the bank, just happened not too long ago, where the bank came up with a different flood zone than the companies we were using, and you have to go with the bank's flood zone. So, but I've only seen it 3 or 4 times in 15 years, so. And there, you can just go right to the NFIP website and you can pull your own flood determination there too. So this is just an example of a flood zone determination. So you see the little property that's highlighted there. That says it's in an X 500 zone, which is a little bit higher risk than an X zone, but it's also not a special flood hazard area risk. But again, it's good to know that, you know, it's telling you, you have a little bit higher risk than people in a regular X zone, so it might be a good idea for you to purchase flood insurance. Again, through the national, the requirement is not really there, but again, bank could require that. So we talked a little bit about elevation certificates. It's a document that details the building's elevation in relation to the base flood elevation. A lot of, like when you're building a new house, a lot of times the, you know, the code office or the community will require that you build the property above the base flood level. It has to be done by a land surveyor, engineer, or architect that's authorized to certify the elevation information. And they can be anywhere from $300 to $2,000. It depends on what the property is. And then once you get that, if you feel that your property could be removed from the special flood hazard area, you can apply for a letter of map amendment, a LOMA, through FEMA, which does not cost anything. The letter of map amendments through Phil that we talked about, those are, FEMA does charge for those. So as far as flood insurance policies, they can really vary a lot. And again, sometimes, you know, it'll be just a regular single family house and we'll do a quote and it'll come back at $3,000. And then the house, you know, around the corner or whatever will come back at $600. So we really, it's varies so much. We really don't know till we actually do the quoting. But it depends on so many things. You know, again, a basement, if there's been past flood losses, the elevation, the original date of construction. And again, they look at individual properties now, so the pricing can really vary.
Also, if your utilities are in the basement or not.
Right, if their utilities have been brought above the basement.
So it is insuring basement utilities?
So yeah, no, like a furnace and your electric
Panel.
panel would be covered, your hot water heater would be
Okay.
covered. The other thing though is, you know, 90% of the flood policies that we write, people want to have a high deductible because that will lower the cost. And if you get a $5,000 deductible, or most banks don't want you to go more than 5,000 on a deductible. Some will let you go 10. But again, you know, there's your furnace right there. You know, that most of it's not going to be covered. Yeah. So, and most, you know, around here, we really, knock on wood, have not had a lot of flooding claims over the years. We really haven't. But if it's going to be anything, it's going to be basement, you know. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of a people really, they have to buy it, but can be, you know, very frustrating too. So this is just an example of a flood quote. This is through the National Flood Insurance Program through Selective, which is one of the companies that we use. And you can see there's offering different deductibles, but with a $5,000 deductible, it's $3,800. And then this is one of the private flood companies that we use, and this is $1,500. So you can see there's a really big difference. And then this is another private company that we use. Well, and this one's 13, you know, so it can really vary widely. There are some things that people can do to lower their flood insurance cost. Again, you know, shop around, you might find a lower rate. If you know, an elevation certificate might be the way to go to get your property. So if you get removed from a special flood hazard area, but you still want to purchase flood insurance, your premiums will be lower if you're typically if you're in a less risk zone. Put in proper flood vents, elevate utilities, again, like you mentioned, Chris. And we've even seen like, some coastal I obviously see a lot of the coastal properties that are all elevated. But we have even heard of people filling in their basements to, have everything, so they don't have a basement anymore. So we actually, on all the policies that we write for homeowners or business policies, we include a flood insurance rejection notice, because that's how serious we feel about flood insurance, that it is a possibility, and we have to have people, when they sign their applications for a new policy, that they sign that they do not, if they have to purchase flood insurance, obviously, they do, but if they don't want to purchase it and they don't have to, we actually make them sign off that they have rejected purchasing flood insurance. So just a few important points. Even a property not in a special flood hazard area can have a flood. Again, over 20% of all flood losses occur in lower risk zones. And maybe other options, the private flood market that we talked about. Landlord, tenant, homeowner has policies generally do not cover flooding, so you're not going to get that coverage on any other policy that you have. Might want to get an elevation certificate, and again, we'd be glad to pull up a flood zone determination or do a flood quote for you anytime. So, and then there's a lot of additional resources, that a lot of websites that you can go to that have other information. So that's about it.
Very good. You know anything about Seneca County, when they're on tap for,
I haven't heard, no.
so they haven't been updated yet?
I don't think so, because I'm sure we would have heard about that.
Yeah, we haven't heard anything
You
yet.
haven't heard anything about it. I'm not sure why they
It's
picked
coming.
Tompkins County,
Have the,
Giving us a timeline.
did the big like Asheville flood, like, did that impact like how they're assessing risk? Because it was, everyone thought that was a good place to.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine that has come into play with what they're doing, deciding what areas to go to next and all that too, because they have only limited resources, so they can, and why they picked Tompkins County for like the last few years, I don't know. It was quite a process though. I mean, I think they started 6 or 7 years ago.
Oh.
So it's been ongoing.
So I had a couple of questions. What are the responsibilities of landlords, both commercial landlords and residential landlords? What are their responsibilities as far as, I mean, I would think the flood insurance, if you're in the floodplain, you as the landlord need to purchase it, but is there required notifications to your tenants, things that wouldn't be covered? You just said that the renter's insurance
It's not gonna cover,
wouldn't
right,
cover anything.
right.
So,
Or a business policy, so
Yeah.
if you own a commercial building and
Right.
you have tenants in there. I mean, we advise people that you really should talk to your tenants about purchasing flood insurance, especially if you are in a special flood hazard area. I don't know, if there's any requirement or regulation or anything, I don't think so. But last thing you want is to have a flood and someone come back and think that the landlord is gonna help you out with that, and even just for your regular contents, because especially landlords, their policy is not gonna cover your tenant's contents, even in a fire or any other kind of a disaster,
You can't buy a contents only flood policy, so if you're a renter and you wanna cover your stuff from a flood, you can buy contents only. Yeah, I don't think it's required to
Not that I've ever heard, no.
tell tenants, but be a good thing to put in your lease agreement, I bet. Yeah.
yeah.
Out of curiosity, average number of renter flood policies in Tompkins County, is it a reasonably common thing?
For our agency,
Not
no.
really. Yeah, no. I don't think I've ever written one.
I may have written a
Yeah.
few, but not many.
I have written.
Mhm. I mean, as long, you are a property owner, if you advise people or have them sign off that, you told them, it's probably good to have in your, like you said, in your lease
Yeah,
agreement. or
Yeah,
just think of our members. We used to own our old building on East Shore Drive. We are tenants here, so
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
I read all the things, but I don't remember that coming.
That building was flooded.
It was
Yeah.
flooded, yeah, and so, from that perspective, but so many of our smaller businesses that are members, you know, they do lease space. and
Right.
it's Like, here's your helpful tip.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you to Bailey Insurance.
No, because really, you know. Every time I turn the news on, there's some other area that they're talking to somebody. I've lived here 60 years. I've never had flooding like this, or, you know, and it's all over the country, like even out in Las Vegas, they were just having they're having big storms out west there. So, you know, it's almost like it's gonna happen at some point here, you know?
Yeah.
We've been lucky that it hasn't, but it's always good to, especially from a business standpoint, to cover yourself with having something like that so that you can't, because people will sue for anything. And, you know, there was a story, I do a lot with the realtors, of there was a flooding in a certain area and two neighbors were talking and the one lady said, "Oh, thank gosh, I've got flood insurance." And the other lady said, "You do? Why do you have flood insurance?" And she said, "Well, my realtor told me that I probably should get it." And the lady said, "My realtor never told me that." And she sued the realtor and she won the case. So, you know. So,
I think. I grew up in Fall Creek also. I think the last significant Fall Creek flood, I think probably early 80s. 81, 82.
81,
yeah.
We had about 4 feet of water in our basement.
Yeah, I had about 10 inches of water in my basement. I live in Cortland, not in a special flood hazard area. And that was probably 25 years ago.
You would reference, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
You would reference mitigation efforts, and I'm just curious, is it the city of Ithaca that's working on that, Tompkins County?
I think-
How do we keep them accountable and?
Yeah,
And government relations task force should probably be on top of slowly, you know.
yeah, I
seeing how
did,
we can accelerate that.
I did this presentation for the city of Ithaca and Tompkins County and the town of Ithaca back in June, right after the maps went into effect. And a lot of people in the audience were, because there were a lot of city officials there and town officials asking about, weren't you supposed to be working on this? And they said they are working on it.
By the planning or building.
Yeah.
departments.
And the state because of who owns, like, for example.
Right.
Whose property it
Right.
is, and, yeah, it's. Right now, Tompkins County is in the process of forming a co-ed. I don't know if I'm pretty sure Cortland has one. It's a community organization. Whatever AD stands for, area development, so it's basically.
Active and disaster.
Active in disaster, thank you. So basically trying to get the community members thinking about, hey, Asheville never expected to have
Right.
a major flood. People in Rome have had a tornado run through the exact same path
Right.
2 years in a row. It's better to formulate this entity and be ready before we're in the middle of a disaster. So I'm just curious how you would work with FEMA, or if what seems like you might want to be engaged with the co-ed.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about it, but we would be interested in helping out or
Yeah,
talking to
definitely.
them or.
I feel like I'm hogging all the air. Do you have any questions?
Anybody else?
Anyone out there on Zoom? I don't know if we can see. Alicia came in and
I know.
asked that one question.
I don't see. Okay, well, thanks for coming, everybody. I have some cards over there too, so if you have questions or Chris is always a great resource too, so.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, appreciate it.
Very well done.
Will you
Thank you.
share this?
I think they recorded it, so.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Got it. Okay, all right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.